When we were just 4 weeks into this championship season, I made a prediction video predicting who I thought the first managers to be sacked during this championship season would be. Well, since I went ahead and made that video, we've had 8 managerial changes in the championship. It's been absolutely ridiculous over these last few weeks. Firing season is well and truly in full swing, and so in today's video we're going to be talking about the job security of the managers that are still in a championship job as things stand, but we're also going to be going ahead and reflecting back on that video and seeing which managers I was right about and which managers have managed to prove me wrong so far. So as you can see on screen right now, this was the tier list that I went ahead and made when we were just 4 games into this championship season. This was managers ranked on their job security at the start of the season, at least from my point of view, how secure I thought they all were in their jobs. As you can see in the could be first to go category, I had Dean Smith down there with Norwich. Obviously wasn't a great start to the season, and in those early few weeks for Norwich there was that pressure that he needed to go ahead and turn things around, and in the end he's obviously gone ahead and done that, so he shot up this tier list since I went ahead and made this video. Denny Schofield in at Huddersfield, was right about him being under pressure from minute 1, and ultimately Huddersfield have gone ahead and made that change. I think from the get-go it was a managerial appointment that I was a little bit pensive over, to be completely honest with you. I think that given all the work that obviously Corberan had done in the club previously, the general track record that we've seen of championship clubs that do promote from within in terms of that next number 1, there have been examples in terms of when that has gone ahead and worked out in the past, but generally speaking it's more of a miss ratio than it is with hit, and I think in the end with Denny Schofield the job was just a little bit too big for him with the pieces of the puzzle that he'd been given this season, the outgoings from that Huddersfield squad, and ultimately they've just looked shot to pieces so far this season, so that managerial departure wasn't a massive surprise in the end. I also had Reading's Paul Ince down there, who I've got to owe a massive apology to. I think that I was along with a lot of other people thinking at this early point in the season where we weren't quite sure where we stood on Reading and Paul Ince. Most of us had predicted Reading to be right amongst it in terms of the relegation picture, but since I made this video, they've absolutely shot up the league and they've stayed there consistently, to be fair to them. The game we all thought that would have been really damning for Paul Ince was that hammering they got against Rotherham, but what this Reading side has in an absolute abundance so far this season is bounce back ability. Whenever they have been on the receiving end of one of those hammerings, the next game week they absolutely come back, and their home record has been absolutely fantastic on top of that as well. So yeah, no doubt massively wrong about Paul Ince. He has gone ahead and proved me wrong. In the under pressure category, we've had 1 managerial departure from this category so far this season, and that was obviously Michael O'Neill. Not a massive surprise in the end. I think that O'Neill was actually the first manager to go, if I remember rightly, but yeah, from the get-go this Stoke squad was looking a little bit misshapen, and I think a lot of people were on a similar wavelength in thinking we were all a little bit surprised that Stoke didn't make that decision to part company with O'Neill earlier, to be honest. Given how the second half of last season had gone, it seemed like they were willing to sort of half-back him in another summer transfer window, but clearly that confidence from within the club just wasn't there with him, and in the end they made that decision to go ahead and make that managerial change, which does affect one of the tiers further up, because I did have Alex Neil with Sunderland in the he'll be fine category. Listen, Sunderland got off to an absolutely brilliant start to the season under Alex Neil, and this was a tier list based on job security, which didn't really take into consideration managers that would willingly leave their club to go elsewhere, and in the end that's exactly what happened with Alex Neil swapping Sunderland for the Stoke job. So yeah, I was under the impression that, you know, he'll be fine, more than happy to stick it out at Sunderland, but in the end we had that narrative coming out that maybe all wasn't what it seemed with Alex Neil at Sunderland, and he made that decision to go to Stoke. In terms of the other 2 managers who I had in the under pressure category, I did have Nigel Pearson there of Bristol City. It was a bit of an inconsistent start they got off to the season. Since making that video, I think that Bristol City have done done fairly well, plenty of goals about them, albeit still that inconsistent patches with how many goals they're conceding, but I would bump him up a tier or two now. And then we also have Steve Bruce, who has pretty much remained in this category throughout the whole season for me, and right now, I mean, he being there could be next to go if we're being brutally honest. He's under massive pressure as things stand. My team, Preston North End, will welcome West Brom to Deepdale in midweek. I'll get to see sort of, you know, in the flesh what this West Brom side are like. I think it's always a lot more interesting as well to actually watch it in the stadium, because you do pick up on a few little nuances of, you know, players' heads that are, you know, maybe dropping and things like that. Does Bruce still have the confidence of this group and the senior figures at the club? All the rumblings that we're hearing at the moment, I'm not completely sure that he does. So yeah, Steve Bruce I had under pressure just a month into the season. I think we're still at that stage with him where I think he'll be probably the next manager to go. Now this variable tier were the sort of managers who I was a little bit indifferent on, in terms of this next run of matches would probably go ahead and decide their job security, whether they are in this for the long run, or, you know, if things do take a turn for the worse, the club will probably go ahead and make a decision on them. Michael Beale at QPR, been really impressed with him. Obviously got a lot of coaching accolades and things like that. A well-respected coach in the game, and so far I think he's took to management really quite well for QPR. Shota Arveladze, I remember saying in this original video that he is one who we could potentially see things unravelling with quite quickly, with all the backing that's gone into Hull over the summer, with, generally speaking, how they were under him last season as well. I think the argument to stick with Arveladze from last season was, you know, he didn't have his players in place, and so we couldn't have really judged him on those results, which were really patchy during the second half of last season. Well, Stoke have got those players in this season, and there's not really been much of an improvement from them. In terms of a goal output, part of you maybe, but in terms of the goals they're conceding, the shots they're facing, I take into consideration the injuries that they've faced so far this season, but that wasn't a massively surprising one when they went ahead and did that. In terms of Watford, I think they will always be in the variable category. I don't think I could ever, you know, move a Watford manager up to he'll be fine or job secure or something like that. I did have Rob Edwards in this category because at Watford you are always walking on eggshells. The amount of managers they've turned over these last few years, we knew that one bad run of form for a manager like Edwards, who was unproven at this level, and that would be it for him, and in the end that's exactly what happened. Russ Martin in at Swansea, he's still doing fine, picking up results along the way. John Eustace at Birmingham, a manager who I think has pleasantly surprised me so far this season. He's got this Birmingham side right now that are looking quite resilient, hard to beat as well, but also have a bit about them going forward, particularly on the road so far this season, is where I've been impressed with him. Blackpool under Michael Appleton still feels like a manager who is in that variable category. Maybe the pressure creeping in on him as well. The month of October is looking particularly tough for Blackpool in terms of the fixtures that they've got coming up, and it will be interesting to see how the mood around the fan base sort of reflects on Appleton over these next few months. It does feel as if there are elements of, you know, you can see what Appleton's trying to do on the coaching side of things with how Blackpool want to play, but the penny's just not quite dropping for them at the moment. And then the last manager that I had in the variable category was Steve Morison in at Cardiff. In the end, they went ahead and bit the bullet on him and decided to part company. This one was quite a surprising one, I'm not going to lie. I did have him in that variable category because Cardiff themselves can be a little bit unpredictable, and Morison himself was still fairly unproven as a manager, but given the high turnover of players that they had, that one did feel like a particularly harsh one, if I'm being honest. And then into the he'll be fine category, we do have some movement within this one as well. Obviously, Paul Heckingbottom still in at Sheffield United. He's doing tremendously well at this point in time. I then had Paul Warne of Rotherham. Now, obviously, like we were mentioning with Alex Neil before, when I made this tier list, I wasn't really taking into consideration a manager taking another job elsewhere. You know, this was purely based on job security and whether or not the club would go ahead and sack him. And Rotherham, excellent start to the season, the most competitive they've ever looked really at this level in terms of their first 8 or so matches, but then Warne decides to walk away on this opportunity, obviously, to go ahead and pick up the Derby job. It is a real shame because this was, I mean, undoubtedly his best chance with this Rotherham side to go ahead and solidify himself in the Championship, but his stock in terms of him being a manager has probably never been higher than it is right now, and so he decided to, you know, strike when the gun's hot, as it were, and move over to Derby. I am a little bit gutted about that one, and obviously Rotherham now, you know, moved in for his replacement. As of recording right now, everything's pointing towards Matt Taylor being that new man in at Rotherham. Rotherham fans would be really interested to get your verdict on that one in the comments down below. But yeah, that was probably one of the more shocking managerial departures we've had of this season. One that I just got wrong was Chris Wilder in at Middlesbrough. When I was recording this video, we were quite fresh into this new season. You know, we were only 4 or so matches in, and Borough hadn't started particularly well, but I think my thinking along with this one was that Wilder comes with such a reputation, and he's got credit in the bank because of those previous performances, that, you know, I was backing his ability probably here more so than his job security, because we all know how high, you know, the expectations are at Middlesbrough, especially with the backing that he's been given in the transfer window and things like that. If he wasn't meeting those criteria with the results he was picking up, he was always going to face this sort of scrutiny. But I was just backing the Wilder hype train, and in the end, that's just not transpired whatsoever so far this season. And right now, they have been the league's biggest underachievers, probably alongside with West Brom. So the future of Chris Wilder does intrigue me. You know, what's next for him? How much has his stock actually gone ahead and fallen off? Because let's not forget, throughout his entire tenure with Middlesbrough, he would constantly be linked to Premier League jobs that were coming available. I don't think that'll be the case anymore with how sour things ended up towards the end at Borough. It'll probably be another job in the Championship for him, and with how many vacancies are available at the moment, how many might be popping up soon, he's an interesting one. Ryan Lowe in at Preston, I had in the he'll be fine category, obviously still in at North End. I do think maybe there's the argument right now that you could maybe drop him down to variable, given our lack of goals so far this season. If that's a pattern which isn't going to be rectified over the month of October, then suddenly we are getting into a little bit of a sticky situation with Ryan Lowe. I think that he's been a bit of a difficult one to judge so far this season, because I think that he's made mistakes in the fact that he has been a little bit stubborn at times, and that to his detriment because we've had a lack of goals. But there's also blames on other ends of the spectrum as well, in terms of individual performances, players being out of form, and the recruitment and things like that. So yeah, maybe he is a bit of a variable one. Maybe drop him down to that one right now. Alex Neil, obviously we discussed earlier in the video. I had him in the he'll be fine category. In the end, he decided to jump ship and go to Stoke City. Liam Richardson in at Wigan, I had in the he'll be fine category, and I'm still absolutely there with him right now. You could maybe even make a case for popping him up for job secure. Really impressed with Wigan so far this season, how they've taken to the Championship. In the early days especially, when it took them a little bit of time to get going in the transfer window, I was a little bit concerned about, okay, what's the long-term plan for Wigan here? But they eventually got the ball rolling with that and have looked really competitive so far this season, particularly in those away matches which they've been part of. John Dahl-Tomasson, yeah, I had him in the he'll be fine category still, along with that line of thinking right now. Blackburn, there have been some instances of inconsistency with them, but generally speaking, I think that he's taken to the new league and club quite well. And Vincent Kompany in at Burnley as well, a manager who has just been backed in terms of his philosophy and play style with all the players that have come in his mould. It would be foolish from Burnley's point of view to go ahead and part company with him, even though there have been a few sort of, you know, inconsistencies, a few frustrating moments with how many draws there have been and stuff like that. Vincent Kompany, no doubt in my mind that he is the right man long term for this Burnley job. And then I had 3 managers in the job secure category. Luckily for me, all these 3 are still in the job, so I was right to put these 3 in that top tier. But Nathan Jones in at Luton, I think the only way he wouldn't be at Luton was if, you know, another club was to come in with a really lucrative offer to go ahead and lure him away from Luton. But right now, I think that would take quite a bit, to be honest, especially given how the Stoke experience went for him and how well he's got this Luton side playing right now. Gary Rowett in at Millwall. There have been a few rumbles of frustration from the Millwall fan base this season. I have felt those with how frustrating at times this Millwall side have been, but I still think Gary Rowett is part of the furniture in at Millwall there, and it would take things to go desperately bad for them to even consider parting company with him. And also Mark Robins in at Coventry. Things haven't been great for Cov so far this season, but even in that time, I certainly don't think there's really ever been a question over his future at the club. He's delivered time on time again improvements on last season's finishes. This season looks like it'll be the first time that won't go ahead and happen, and they will go ahead and regress, but I still don't think Coventry will go down, if I'm being brutally honest. Even given their slow starts this season, it now seems as if they're starting to pick things up. There we have it guys, that was the tier list from the very start of the season. Do take into consideration that when I made that, obviously it was very early days in the Championship, and since then quite a bit has changed. But yeah, I did make the right calls on a few managers, but also got it wrong with quite a few as well, most notably with Paul Ince in at Reading. But thank you very much for tuning in to today's video, guys. As always, make sure to leave a like if you did go on to enjoy, and do stick around and subscribe for some regular Championship content. Thanks for watching though, guys, and I'll see you all in the next one.